Tony Messenger, who mainly wears his Denver Broncos jersey from time to time. What do you think, Tony Messenger? We live amongst Cub fans, and I do believe that Bill McClellan is a Cub fan. What are your thoughts as you see the Cubs win the World Series for the first time in 108 years?
I'm sure Bill McClellan will be the happiest guy in St. Louis today. I will say a couple of things. First of all, I owe my son $20. My 11-year-old is he's a Rockies fan like me. He's a Cardinals fan. He's lived his whole life in Missouri, but he's a power-hitting left-handed hitting first baseman, and he loves Anthony Rizzo. So my son was rooting for the Cubs, a Cardinals fan rooting for the Cubs, because he's just a fan of baseball. So even though he fell asleep, I think he was happy this morning, mostly because he knows he's got $20 coming his way. And now I'm going to have a whole bunch of leaves to rake, because the other side of the bet was he was going to have to rake the leaves. So now I've got work to do this weekend, unfortunately.
How old is your son? 11 years old?
He's 11.
11 years old, loves baseball, loves Anthony Rizzo, has all the motivation to stay up to watch the Cubs win the World Series, and he fell asleep watching the game.
Yeah, he fell, and this
Criminal.
is, so my wife tells me this morning, I wasn't at the breakfast table for this. My wife says that he's upset because he fell asleep like in the 7th or 8th inning. Mm-hmm. And we just let him sleep on the couch, and then eventually, during the rain delay, we put him to bed. He's convinced we made him go to bed like in the 7th inning and wouldn't let him stay up to watch the World Series.
Well, that sounds like a Cub fan delusional. So
Yeah.
All right, we can talk about the start of the game time and the end of the game time next hour. But your column, and it looks like this NorthSouth Metrolink conversation has heated up once again, and Mayor Slay poured a little gasoline on the fire.
Yeah, it's clear that when the mayor said this was going to be a priority in his last term, he meant it. This week, the acting director of the Federal Transit Administration was in town to tour the route, and I met them at Mud House, a Southside coffee shop on Cherokee Street, to talk to them about it. And it's clear that there is progress, that things are moving forward. The latest, to sort of redo the route. The route has been out there for a long time, but, new development has taken place, and so they have to update the route. That's going on right now. And then the big question after this study gets done, and after it becomes clear to all of the public officials in the region, and by all of, I mean primarily Steve Stinger, the county executive, because all the other public officials in the region are mostly on board, that NorthSouth Metrolink is the route that has to get done, regardless of any others are worthy. That is the route that is the priority. Then the question becomes, what's the community willing to do? And that's where so many people in sort of a traditional second city St. Louis reaction say, well, we're never going to find the money for that. We're never going to be able to get the city and the county to agree. We're never going to be able to do that. That's the next challenge. The mayor, when I talked to him this week, has a proposal. I don't know if he's completely unveiled it yet, but he wants to see parking fees in the city raised, and thinks he can get about $250 million raised in that regard. What Carolyn Flowers, the acting head of the FTA, said is the way these things are getting done today in cities all over the country is you have to be able to match some of the federal dollars. If the federal government sees a local commitment, then they're going to come forward with the dollars in some capacity. And so I think that building North-South Metrolink is absolutely an important thing for the city, and I think it's getting more and more realistic, but there's still a long ways to go.
The people who are most outspoken, the people who least want it, are the people, and this is just anecdotally, my sort of humble opinion on the whole idea, the people who least want it will never use it, no plan to use it, don't live in the city, live in the county or St. Charles or some other far-off county and will never be asked to pay for it. And so the question is their voice going to be loud enough to stop the Metrolink from happening?
I don't think so, because I know a lot of people in the city want it. I know a lot of people in the county want it. I know people that use it. I know people that understand its economic development opportunities, Republicans, Democrats, etc. The big question becomes, how regional does St. Louis want to get when it funds big projects like this? Carolyn Flowers compared St. Louis to Denver, my hometown, and when Denver funds its Metrolink expansion, it does it with a 5-county tax, so nobody's getting hit too hard and the region buys in. St. Louis doesn't very often think that way. We sometimes can get St. Louis City and St. Louis County and maybe St. Charles to go in on something. We sometimes, with Metrolink, have gotten a couple of the counties on the other side of Illinois to go in as well. But getting 5 or 6 or 7 counties in the metro area to all agree to invest in the region, particularly when the primary benefit of that initial investment is in the core, in the city of St. Louis, that's a tough sell. And so if we're going to go that regionally, I think that makes it harder to get things done. If we're going to focus on St. Louis City and St. Louis County, I think there are ways to get it done. It may be one sort of tax in St. Louis City and another one in the county, but as long as voters in both places see a benefit to investing in Metrolink, they have raised their taxes to do that before, and if they see federal dollars following, I think there's an opportunity to get something done.
Leaders in St. Louis County won't even allow the voters of St. Louis County to vote on the arch tax to help fund the renovation of the arch. So I think it'd be a hard press to get St. Charles County to put on the ballot or to get the people to pass something for a Metrolink tax of some way, shape, or form.
I think the key, you can't do this the old St. Louis way. One of the reasons why St. Charles County pushed back and County Executive Steve Ellman on the arch tax stuff was it was sort of the old traditional St. Louis way of doing things. Let's get this through the legislature without anybody paying attention. Let's do this quietly. Let's make it a done deal before anybody knows about it, and then let's all clap our hands and talk about how wonderful we are. This has to be an open public process in which the community gets behind the idea that transit is going to increase GDP in the St. Louis region. It's going to increase everybody's economic development, and it's also going to increase racial equity. It's going to increase job opportunity. There's just so many things that Metrolink expansion, particularly the north-south route, can do for this city. And if we don't do it, and if the neighborhoods that need it most are allowed to crumble, then that affects all of us negatively. It's one of these things where it's not a zero-sum game. It's not saying, well, I don't want to invest in Metrolink. I want to keep my money in my pocket. Well, guess what? If you don't invest in Metrolink, your money's being taken out of your pocket anyway because the city's going to diminish itself, and ultimately all of our investments will be hurt. That's the argument that has to be made when it comes to investing in the core of the St. Louis region. And I think sometimes that argument fails because we don't make that argument publicly. We don't invite input from our neighbors. That's what has to happen to build a coalition to make good things happen in this region.
Tony Messenger, never dull when you're on the show, Tuesdays and Thursdays with us, and then every single day you can be read at stltoday.com. Tony, have a good weekend. Thanks for checking in.
Good to talk to you.
828.